know what they say about the crazy ones?
Huh?
I'm just gonna hurt you. Really, really bad.
So the Ayer Cut, right? The Ayer Cut is like the Snyder Cut used to be, this almost mythical thing that some people say exists. I mean, David Ayer himself says that this is something that's real, that is out there. But my question to you would be this: have you heard the latest talk in the social sphere about the Ayer Cut? And clicking on this video, you probably have heard about it. So it's a bit of a question that you don't have to answer. But I am still kind of skeptical. Skeptical. Wow, I'm really chewing up my words today. But yeah, I'm skeptical about this, right? Because David Ayer's cut of the Suicide Squad, we all know that it exists, but in what shape does it exist? That's the question, right? We know that when the Snyder Cut was a mythical object that sort of existed in some people's mind and not, it was really, it was hard to tell if it was real or not, right? Like we saw the picture that Zack Snyder posted on social media of like, hey, look, I've got the reels and stuff, and like it's there. But really, like, did it mean that it was actually ready to go? No. Like the studio, Warner Brothers, had to spend like $70 million to get that cut ready to literally, put out on HBO Max and make that 4-hour movie. Not only that, it gave them like 30 to 50, I forget the exact number, millions of dollars, basically tens of millions of dollars to go and do some additional filmography. And then really that added photography was what helped to stitch together the ultimate story that Zack Snyder wanted to tell. And there was a lot of VFX work that had to be done. So with the David Ayer cut of the Suicide Squad, the question becomes this, right? He recently said James Gunn has told him that the Ayer Cut will have its time to be shared. Like, it would have its time to be shared, and when that happens, we don't know. Now, basically around the same time that he said this on his Twitter, everybody goes crazy with the headlines and starts talking about like, oh my God, James Gunn said that the Ayer Cut is going to be a thing, that is going to happen. And then people like, playing this game of telephone took the next step and said, oh, not only is it going to happen, it's going to happen in 2024 before James Gunn launches his new DCU with Superman Legacy, which now we're going to have Creature Commandos next year, but the big official launch, the cinematic launch of the DCU is with Superman Legacy in 2025. So it started to just become like this whole social media storm, which I'm sure if you've been online the last few days and been following DC News, you're well aware of that. So as part of that, and I think where this rumor kind of started is because as part of the, Ayer saying what he said about the Ayer Cut in one of his recent Twitter posts, is he said that, look, James Gunn deserves to launch his new shared universe without any baggage from the past. So I think people took that to mean that, oh, the Ayer Cut is going to get released before Superman Legacy, and since Superman Legacy is coming out in 2025, that must mean that Ayer Cut is coming out in 2024. So that's where this comes from. Now, I still wonder though if that is actually true, and I think David Ayer is probably going to support me on this, because when he was asked by one of the accounts on Twitter, the account that goes by the name of The Ayer Cut or @CutAyer, and is basically all about the Ayer Cut of the Suicide Squad, which, by the way, the theatrical version of the Suicide Squad movie from David Ayer, I really loved it. I thought it was a lot of fun. I actually will probably do a video in the future where I talk about how I prefer that version of the Suicide Squad. I actually prefer the extended version that they put out on Blu-ray later. But like, I like that movie better than the Suicide Squad. And that part of it has to do with like what they did with Rick Flag in the second movie, but also just, Will Smith and, Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn, which was a breakout hit of a character. The movie made like $700 million, like at the box office. Like, people keep looking at the score and say like, oh my God, the movie was so trash, and it's like cool to hate on a film, but I'm like, okay, great. Rotten Tomatoes scores were definitely ugly on both the audience and the critic side. But when you go back and you look at the numbers that movie made at the box office, those were more than respectable. That movie was very profitable for the studio at Warner Brothers. So look, ultimately, getting back to this whole David Ayer situation, he, debunked the rumor when the Ayer Cut Twitter account asked him, like, hey man, what's going on with this Ayer Cut? Are you saying it's going to come out in 2024? David Ayer went and said, silly rumor, not true, it ain't happening. And to me, that's just like, okay. So in one set of words, you said that it's going to have its time and James Gunn deserves to launch his universe without any kind of baggage hanging around from past projects. And then you're saying, okay, well, there's no, truthfulness, at least as of yet, to the idea that the Ayer Cut will come out in 2024. So logic would tell you that either when he made those comments about James Gunn telling him that Ayer Cut will have its, day in the sun, if you will, or it's time to be shared, in his own words, he was probably speculating a little bit regarding like the timing of it. And I think he implied a lot more than maybe he should have. And of course, the internet being the internet takes everything too far. I personally will tell you this. Even though James Gunn said that this will happen, I really don't think this is going to be happening anytime soon, because there's already so much for the new DC studios to focus on that I would really looking back at even the Suicide Squad. There's a lot of baggage attached to the old DCU in general. Whether it's a good movie or a bad movie, they just seem to, of late, no matter what they do, they can't get a hit, And the Suicide Squad came out at a time when the pandemic was really just destroying every movie in sight. Nobody was going to the movie theaters for health safety purposes, and all the reasons why, one of the why they decided to release it on HBO Max at the same time, which some people might say hurt it more than it helped it, and that's fair. But ultimately, it's difficult for me to tell you that the Ayer Cut is ever going to come to life, simply because the old Warner Brothers that set up the old DCEU and took it to, well, not really very much highs, but more lows than highs. That Warner Brothers regime is no longer here. You got David Zaslav and company in charge. David Zaslav and company, what they want to do is they want to save money. They don't want to spend money just to spend money. And they don't see the value in spending tens of millions of dollars on a project that's going to drop on Max and not make any money for them, because subscriptions alone is not a good return on their investment. They wouldn't have dropped $70 million to finish the Snyder Cut. The old Warner Brothers did, not this one. Warner Brothers Discovery is all about making that cash, not wasting it. So I do think that even if it's not a lot of visual effects things, even if they don't have to do any new photography like Zack Snyder had to do, there's still going to be a good amount of work that has to happen in order for the Ayer Cut to become worthy of sharing to the world as a movie. Whether it's the soundtrack, because soundtracks are cut for the movie as it's put out in theaters. So if there's a different cut, scenes that have a different runtime, there's other scenes that were left on the floor, as Will Smith said, there was a lot left on the floor for the Suicide Squad that we did get to see. Then you have to do a lot of work with sound. You have to do finishing work with color grading, with sound design, as well as just a lot of those invisible VFX, where you're wire work and you're just taking that stuff out. So or like gunshot, VFX, things of that nature, explosions. So, and even face replacements, on stunt doubles, that happens all the time now in Hollywood, especially superhero movies. A lot of times you're like, oh my God, that is Scarlett Johansson swinging down the bridge in The Winter Soldier. No, it was actually a stunt double, and then they just replaced her face with Scarlett Johansson's face in post-production. But that's an extensive and very time-consuming and expensive process to do. So there's things like that which will have to happen in order for this movie to actually be a thing, unless they're okay with just saying, okay, well, here it is with the unfinished pieces being the unfinished pieces, and it kind of plays like if they were, if you were watching those deleted scenes that you get on those Blu-rays as extras, and then they're just gonna say, oh yeah, just imagine that, this previs version was a real thing, but usually they don't like insert it into the movie. In this case, you'd be watching a movie where everything looked finished and perfect, and then all of a sudden you're watching something that clearly you had wires, or like, oh, that's clearly a stunt double, or there's no music. What happened in the music is the audio looks a little rough. I can't really hear them properly. Did they not redub that? Like, what? All of those things would be missing. So I definitely think that this would be an additional expense, and I think it's also something. Look, James Gunn has a lot of credibility as the head of DC Studios, but he hasn't really done a lot to be able to go to David Zaslav right now and say, hey man, give me a $20-30 million so that David Ayer can come back and finish work on his cut of a movie that we already released in theaters, made money on, and is well in the past for us as a studio. That's something that I think James Gunn would have more credibility and more pull off with his boss, as well as in general just being willing to put that kind of money behind a project like essentially a director's cut of a movie that came out years ago. He's going to have that after Superman Legacy succeeds, if Superman Legacy succeeds, after the DCU is a successful burgeoning universe, because then when they do the Ayer Cut, it would just be like a cherry on top. It wouldn't be like, oh, at least we did the Ayer Cut and that was fun, wasn't it? You don't want to compromise your new cinematic universe before it even begins. Like, because while the Snyder Cut of the Zack Snyder's Justice League was a fantastic win for the fans, it also created even more of a divide amongst the fans, where people are looking at it and saying, hey, why did we not get all the movies that the Snyder Cut set up, despite the fact that there were no guarantees made that anything set up in the Snyder Cut was ever going to be followed up upon. So if you can imagine, if Ayer Cut comes out, let's say in 2024, and it leaves a bunch of open plot threads hanging that will never be followed through on, all of a sudden the internet has something to hang on to and say, hey, this is not our Superman with Superman Legacy, which some people will already do that, fair, but instead let's get back more Suicide Squad from David Ayer, and like where those characters go. Rick Flag's character is still alive, and the Suicide Squad is my Suicide Squad. The Suicide Squad is not my, like all of that stuff. Like it's and you know what, James Gunn is smarter than that. So I do believe that while the Ayer Cut might be a thing and may happen eventually, I just don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. It's not going to be something that will happen within the next couple of years at least. I mean, like it may happen in the near distant future, and by that I mean like it may happen in the next 4 or 5 years maybe, but it's probably not going to happen anytime like within the next year or two. And David Ayer can keep holding on to that and keep beating that drum, and eventually it will probably happen because if the support stays there. But I just don't think it's going to be anytime soon. So let me know in the comments below what you guys think.